All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today is May 12th, 2021, 5/12/21, and I'm back with another edition of the Wednesday live show. And welcome. I know a lot of you guys are going to watch this on replay. And so there's a lot going on this morning. First of all, as everybody probably knows that watches this stuff, is the inflation numbers came out way hotter than expected, and that's causing a little bit of drama, I should say, in the markets and the financial media. I think the headline CPI number was like 4.2, and so now everyone's got to sort of readjust their models to figure out whether inflation is transitory. I mean, here's the thing. We've talked about this and we've all seen the rising commodity prices, copper and lumber and corn and literally all the commodities have been going crazy as far as increases for a while. And the Fed has been saying that there's really not any inflation while everyone's watching prices go up. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. And what'll even be more interesting is to see how it will affect stocks. The funny thing is, yesterday the market gapped down about 1%, and at the end of the day, I checked the headline at Reuters and it said that inflation jitters had spooked the market. So kind of interesting, but so there's a lot going on, and today is sort of kind of a milestone moment because now the conversation is going to be centered around inflation and how that will affect certain stocks and the market and all that good stuff. So, I mean, here's the thing. No regular average consumer wants to see the prices of all the stuff that they buy go up. And so it is what it is, right? And I mean, inflation is one of the worst things for, just everything in general. And everybody knows that. Even the Fed members know that. So, um, with that said, take a quick look at the S&P 500 here. Look at that gap down yesterday, and I mean it really at one point it kind of took out these other lows here and kind of tanked, and then by the end of the day it rallied back, but I mean it was still down 1%, right? And so this morning we got a gap down, and we had a little bit of a bounce, but so far we're getting some downside follow through. But I mean if you look at the chart, the funny thing is that when I was here last week, um, and by the way, I'm using these new charts here. So let's see, 5-4. There's a few things I don't like about these charts, but I'm gonna do it anyway. So, the last time I was here was back on one of these couple of days here, and I said, well, it kind of looks like the market might want to pull back a little bit and tag this 50-day. And of course, then there was this 2-day rally here, but look at where we are now. We're starting to lose this support here. And this is the S&P 500, and all the markets are looking a little bit different right now. And so, a pullback, a dip to the 50-day. This is a 50-day moving average. Interestingly enough, you have to bear with me because, like I said, I'm switching over to these new charts now, and so there's a few things about them that, like that right there, I didn't actually mean to draw that trend line. So there's a few things about these new charts that I'm still struggling a little bit with, but um, and see, here's one of the issues I have with it is this. When I turn off the drawing tools, then it kind of, well, I guess that's not a big deal. It makes the chart shift a little bit. You see that time frame shift, but anyway, so yesterday or last night when I was experimenting, I drew this trend line on the Qs. Let me pull that down a little bit. Should be able to see. Oh, I see what's happening here. You can't see that that's the Qs unless I have it squished down over there. So there you go. So if I'm on a chart or whatever and I turn off the drawing tools, if I leave the drawing tools open, if I try and drag the chart, it draws whatever I have open in the drawing tools. So that's Anyhow, so there's the trend line on the Qs to sort of keep in mind, right? The Nasdaq has been considerably weaker than the S&P, as we know. So let's take a quick look at, and of course, the Dow just hit an all-time high. Russell's looking a little sort of vulnerable here, right? See, there's a lot of stocks, especially the smaller cap stocks, that are down significantly, right? Tech stocks, growth stocks, tons of random stocks out there down significantly from their highs, and or even the past couple of weeks here, the past few weeks, a lot of stocks have really gotten hit hard. And meanwhile, the indexes, the averages are kind of holding up okay, right? So INDU is the ticker symbol for the Dow here. Kind of an interesting looking chart. I mean, look at that. Look at that sort of spike high there. That's under normal circumstances. And hey, maybe this time, but whenever you get like these sort of spike highs like that, which was just on Monday, um, tend to dip a little bit. This little area back over here was kind of had a similar look to it, I suppose. I don't know. That was kind of a spike high there, but anyway, the Dow. Let's see if I can. Yeah. So like I said, bear with me on these charts here. I'm not as proficient with these particular charts as I was with the other ones, but it's like I've been saying the past couple of weeks, I'm sort of making the switch here. So anyway, yeah, that's it just looks like sort of a normal kind of pullback might be in the cards here, just based on that particular pattern. All the indexes are looking a little bit vulnerable. That's an unusual sort of pattern. However, as you can see, the Dow's clearly above all this support back here. So it's just a matter of which index you look at. They all look a little bit different. The Nasdaq looks a little rough here actually, and so that trend line, theoretically it's important, but over the years we've seen plenty of trend lines get broken, and then the market manages to rally back. So you just never know. You just never know when you're in for real correction. The funny thing though is not really funny, but with the S&P having hit the all-time high in the history of the world, just a few days ago, right? That was Friday. Um, there sure is a lot of stocks that have been beaten up, and so not everything is participating, obviously. And there's been, a shift. Some of the energy stocks, energy's been looking okay, but the energy ETFs don't look all that great. But there's a lot of energy stocks that have pretty decent looking patterns, and but tech has really sort of taken it on the chin. We talk about that. They like to talk a lot about this ARK ETF, and it broke support last week, or actually this week. It's kind of looks like it's kind of breaking support a little bit, and so the over under on this, of course, it gapped down significantly yesterday and then rallied all day, and a lot of tech stocks did that. So market's kind of oversold. On a short-term basis, we are kind of oversold, but this is probably a good sort of representation for a lot of the newfangled high-tech growth stocks and all that kind of stuff. Um, so consequently, where we are right now is, as you probably know, we have no open swing trades, which is kind of a cool place to be. Now, we had we had the JO, which I don't actually have marked up here, but we had JO as an entry, was like back over here somewhere back in early April, but this turned out to be a pretty good winner, quite frankly. The see the JO, let me on my other screen here, let me look at the closed trades. Yeah, this was up 12% or for a swing trade, which is not bad in an ETF like that. So, um, I believe last week we just had the two open swing trades. So this ended up 12%. The trailing stop was up here at 42, right? When it took this last sort of leg up, the trailing stop tightened up, came up to 42, and it got tagged right there on Monday. So that got closed on Monday. And then we had the we had the MJ, which just got closed too. And the funny thing about this is that the open, like literally the low yesterday was 1970, and that's exactly where the stop was to the penny, right? And so the idea was, excuse me, the idea was is that this little, and it was under the 50-day granted, so that's a 50-day moving average. But anyway, this little pattern here and this rally would have presented a decent opportunity for a change in trend and a rally back up here. It didn't quite make it to the 50-day, but and it still doesn't look too bad. But the idea is that it needed to make a higher low, like on this pullback here, and it just so happens we got knocked out right there. So that was 7.5%. It doesn't look like much on here, but this is an extremely volatile ETF. And so at this point, this is still probably worth keeping an eye on, right? So if I drew a trend line across these highs right here, a break of that trend line and a break over the 50-day might present another opportunity. So we'll have to we'll just have to see. But anyway, so yeah, this one hit the stop, and between the two of them, they didn't do too bad. The prior few closed trades did pretty well. So there hasn't been a whole lot of activity. But here's the thing: is I was talking to Jeffrey about this, and he decided that he had some tricks up his sleeve as far as because there hasn't been anything showing up on the pending list, right? So that's been kind of a thing, and so he had some tricks up his sleeve, a couple different types of setups, and so basically what he did was um, he decided to run some scans on some different types of setups so that he could find us now that we're in pullback mode. Find us some new pending trades. And so here we go. So now we got a whole new, Intel's been on the pending list for a while, but we have a whole new set of pending trades here that are going to set up, and theoretically in the next cycle. And here's the thing: a lot of stocks, when you see these random stocks, and most of them, should look kind of familiar to you. It's kind of cool to have the average range here because that way you know what to expect. Like the stocks that, like Intel with a 2% average daily range, not extremely volatile. Whereas like this SLAB is extremely volatile, right? And so you can kind of get an idea of, and that's the monthly. I'm sorry, that's the daily average range calculated over a month. So what I thought we would do here today is take a quick look through the pending trades and see what they look like. So without further ado, there's 9 of them. So without further ado, let's just take a look here. This one's interesting. It had a big bullish engulfing candle yesterday. Oh, so see, I didn't mean to do that. So here's what I got to do. Rectangle. I'm doing this on kind of the side of the screen here. So here we go. XLRN. I will draw the trigger on here. It looks like it's up here somewhere. That's where it looks like. So let me zoom out on the chart here and extend that. There we go. Let's see if I turn the crosshairs on. The high that day was 123.10. The trigger right now is 123.50. So it's going to be a little bit above that. There we go. Whoop, move that up just a little bit. There we go. All right, so now let me zoom out here, and you can see that even though it's below the 50-day, I mean, here's the thing about the 50-day moving average. I should probably just take it off the chart, because sometimes if you put a bunch of moving averages on your chart, sometimes it'll give you sort of subconsciously anyway. I look at this and I'm like, oh man, there's that 50-day sloping down, but you can see plenty of times where the stock pokes below the 50-day for a period of time and just rallies right back above it with sort of these V bottoms or whatever. So anyway, long story short, and back over here. Um, and theoretically, the stock can like sort of trade down to sideways. I'm gonna guess as long as this low right here holds, that everything looks pretty good here. So decent snapback rally in this has a lot of potential. Let's zoom out on that chart. Yeah, so this is quite frankly is a pretty nice little dip. You know what? I think let me see what this looks like when I do this. Yeah, it just kind of adjusts the chart a little bit, but what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to take that 50-day off of there for now. Just get rid of it. That'll make everything seem a little bit simpler. And I haven't even looked through all these with like the 50 and the 200 and all that good stuff, but anyhow, yeah, this that sort of spike low reversal bullish engulfing candle is a pretty good, it's a pretty good sign that there's a potential rally back up to. I would say if it can, it's got to close over. It's got to close over the current trigger, which is 123.50. If this were to meander down over the next week or so, this could potentially come down a little bit, and then basically, we're sort of looking for sort of a reversal and a rally back up to obviously 130 looks like fairly significant resistance point, right? Which would be a pretty decent rally, if it rallied up to there. But then if you can get through 130, you can get a pretty decent rally back up. So you can see a lot of spots on here where this thing sort of spiked down or whatever and then recovered. So this has a lot of potential, quite frankly. Moving on, a couple of these I've already marked up. So I was experimenting with that last night. And there's another one. So as of right now, it hits the list, and the entry point is slightly over this recent high here. I don't know if I have it drawn exact, because as you can see, one of the other like sort of weird things, and maybe I haven't figured it out yet, but on these charts, like they're very sparse with the price scale over here, and I haven't seen an easy way to adjust that price scale, right? And even like when you zoom in, it actually does adjust a little bit. That's the way that I've seen to adjust the price scale, is by zooming in, right? But it's still, as you can see, it's sort of static, I guess you would say. Anyhow, so this one obviously doesn't look like it's going to trigger in, and I just want to remind you that, and I've talked about this a lot of times, I want to remind you that when stocks when they first hit the pending list, the trigger price tends to be like well above the current price action, right? It starts off like well above the recent price action, like above this last high. As the price settles down more and consolidates or trades sideways or bounces around sort of, inside this range between that low and that high, what'll happen is this trigger price will slowly start to fade down a little bit until they meet out in the future. That's sort of the whole idea of it. So anyway, so we got some exciting things to look forward to, because out of these 9 stocks here, some of them are bound to trigger in probably, I would say probably next week. Now, any of them that have like, big V reversals, which a lot of stocks do nowadays, could, trigger in any day. There's a couple of them, like this particular one too, is the current price action is pretty far away from that last pivot high. And so when they first hit the list, they tend to be above like the last pivot high, the entry. And as it consolidates at a lower price, the trigger will move down some, and then meet theoretically out in the future. So there you go. So right now on Marvell, trigger price is 46.70, and stock's way down here at 42, and so that's good because the thing of it is, these are just starting to set up here. So my guess is that I can draw a trend line right here. These trend lines actually look pretty good, and let me do this. I'm sort of getting the hang of a little bit here. Whoops, that's funny the way the chart shifts when I do that, but that's how I'm able to drag the chart without drawing a trend line, is I have to turn the drawing tools on and off. So in theory, what happens here is this thing bounces around, below this trend line a little bit, and as you can see, there's quite a few days between this and breaking the trend line down here, and so this trigger price will slowly work its way down that trend line, and then potentially they meet out here in the future at a lower price, and that's when you get the rally up, break the trend line, rally up through the trigger price, which is down here, say 44 something, and then you get the nice, rebound like you see in this stock so many times. So this one actually looks pretty good. This is a semiconductor stock, got a pretty decent look to it, and so lots of potential here. But if you take a look at this area back over here, right, you can see something, kind of similar to it. And, notice how it kind of consolidated for a few days or whatever and then turned back up. Back over here, you had something a little bit similar, say, and see this is, now I've lost my place here. Oh yeah, there we go. Like right there. Try that again. There we go. I'll get used to these charts a little bit in the future. Whoops. See, I'll get used to these things and as I go. But there you go. So you get the idea, right? And so what we're looking at here with the entry would be like, if this thing hit the pending list with the entry over here and then sold down a little bit and then the entry moved down, and so there's still little ways to go here, right? So in theory, and of course, it can drop further, right? It could drop further, and this trigger price, I should say, could, meet it way down here in the future, right? Well, the way that this chart, I mean, it could be like this, out here way in the future, but as of right now, it's still right above that last pivot high. So there you go. All right, so Marvell looking halfway decent. Let's move down the list here and see what's next. It's actually kind of fun, excuse me, looking through the pending stocks is always kind of fun because you can kind of pick and choose which ones that you think, look really good. And obviously, on the page that has the pending stocks, right? I'll move that over a little bit so you can see it. This page that has the pending trades on it here. There we go. The pending trades up here will be the triggered today. And so basically, if you get up in the morning and look at this before the market opens, you'll see any stocks that are triggering in for that day. So you don't necessarily have to like go through this pending list and watch every little thing about it and to see if they're triggering in or if the trigger price moved. So because any day that one becomes an actual open trade, you'll see it hit the triggered today list. So anyway, so back to the charts here. We'll move on to the next ones. Now I need to adjust my chart a little bit. There we go. All right, so there's Baidu. Baidu's got kind of a funky little, quite honestly, it doesn't look all that great. However, there's a couple things about it that do look halfway decent. And one is this sort of trend line here and yesterday's little pivot low reversal type of thing, which was, similar to this one. So I mean, you can see the potential here, even though theoretically the chart, as when I zoom out of this chart, it's kind of it looks a little sketchy. However, right now the trigger's sitting right at 200 here, and my guess is if this thing were able to turn around at this point here and trade above that we get a pretty good rally out of it. From 200 to 225 would be over 10%, and so at that point, it's going to be all about how the trade plays out. But there's potential for a reversal back up to this area of resistance, and then depending on what happens, look at this overall chart though. That's kind of a funky pattern, to tell you the truth, but real nice orderly sort of sell down over here. So keep our eye on that. Baidu not looking too bad. Next up on the list is ALRM, which has a nice pullback happening here and some consolidation around support. So I haven't actually had a chance to go through and see about any of these things releasing earnings anytime soon, but it's too bad that the ticker symbol's not up here instead of way over there on the left. So what's happening here is I'm turning on and off the drawing tools for the charting software. And when I do that, the chart squeezes itself in. It squeezes together and or expands out, zooms out. So let me go ahead and draw the current. I'm going to say it's right about here. Right up here is about the current trigger for ALRM. Now I can turn these crosshairs on, and yeah, pretty close. 87 bucks even. So I actually got pretty close with that. Move it up move this up just a tad. There we go. That looks about right. So there we go. A lot of potential here too, right? This can sort of float down over the next few days. Maybe be like 85 something, depending on what the price action does. Now, if this just sort of turns around and just goes through here before it gets a chance to move down, but ideally, we're starting to get a little bit of consolidation after this sell down, and so theoretically, yesterday's kind of reversal bar, and there's tons of those out there too, by the way. But you can see what happened over here. Had a similar kind of reversal bar, I guess. A little bit different. There wasn't much of a gap down over here, but when you get a sell down like this and a gap down, that has a lot of potential to sort of mark the end of the cycle, and then you get a rally back up. So this is setting up pretty good, actually. setting up pretty good, obviously, for um, a little consolidation and then a turn back up, right? And then we'd look for, rally back up to, 94, $95, which would be a pretty good, pretty decent little swing trade there. So keep in mind that these are all just now hitting the pending list, right, for the first time, and they may or may not trigger in anytime soon. So it's going to be interesting. And of course, if the market, see, here's the other thing that's kind of neat about the system, and I've mentioned this past couple of weeks, is that the market itself has been up at the highs, and we haven't had a real, even dip until just, recently. We haven't seen a dip in a while. We haven't seen any sort of correction in a long time, or a pullback or anything. And so you don't want to have a whole bunch of open trades at the top of the cycle. Now that we've had, a whole bunch of individual stocks have sold off a bit, we're starting to see some of these things shaping back up. So there you go. So anyway, everything's kind of, these are stocks that are on deck here. Autodesk, couple of sell-offs here, and then theoretically, high or low, and then a reversal. Yeah, this one's not too thrilling to me. However, obviously the stock is in a longer term uptrend. Let's see if I can draw a trend line on this thing. Yeah, like that. So kind of looks like the NASDAQ, right? Like the Qs. They're starting to come right down to a rising trend line, and so it'll be a matter of whether it bounces off that trend line or loses it. And so with this particular stock, they don't always look all that great at first, but that doesn't mean that they can't consolidate and cycle back up. So this one's a little sketchy to me, just because I'm sort of trained to see this trend line right here and think, oh man, if it breaks that, look out. But and so if it were to break down and lose these recent lows back here, then my guess is that it would just drop off the list. Like all these are not likely to trigger in, and some of them that if they continue down, they reach a certain point where they're no longer on the list. So Twitter here is kind of an interesting one to have on the list because as you might know, Twitter had a problem over earnings, and so it gapped down pretty big. But keep in mind, look back over here, back in November, same sort of thing. You probably had a big earnings gap down, and it almost immediately turned around and rallied back higher, right? Sell off over here, turned right back around, and so I guess looking for something similar here as far as Twitter, it sells down, consolidates, and then starts to turn back up. And in the past, it's actually done pretty well after a lot of the sell down gaps like that. So if I were to draw a trend line on this, I don't know. It's because of the earnings that makes it a little bit sort of suspect. So my guess is that if this low right here holds, and that was yesterday's low. See it, it kind of had a bullish engulfing candle yesterday, and so like I said, there's a lot of stocks out there that did the same thing, but there's some potential here for Twitter to consolidate and turn back up. If it loses this low, there's some support right there, but I mean, if this thing's headed back down to 40, then it's going to drop off the pending list at some point. So the idea is that the pending list is very fluid, right? Stocks hit it and they tend to stay on there for a while, and then if they drop far enough, they'll be off the list. The actual trigger price is fluid. It can change. I'm not gonna. It can change every day, but I'm not gonna say that it's gonna change every day. It really just depends on the individual situation, right? It depends on what the price does. So if the price sort of stays in the same area and consolidates, then the trigger price is going to stay in the same area. But then after as time goes on, right? Like if this consolidates sort of, in the lower 50s here, but stays above that low, as time goes on, that trigger price will come out here. It'll come down out here into the future and then meet the price right about the same time that you're getting the upswing. So that's the whole idea of it, as you know. And so, hey, actually looking pretty good. Twitter has a good habit of, the funny thing is, so something like this, same sort of thing. Like these stocks have sold down fairly significantly, and as of yesterday, it didn't look too bad. You had sort of a couple of bottoming looking bars, and then today you're getting a little further downside here. So, but at the same time, if you notice if you notice where the trigger price is on this, this is I guess sort of one of the extreme examples here, because I just want to point this out real quick that the trigger price is starting off on this like up here, right? There's absolutely this is one that the trigger price is going to come down, and I mean, unless SHAK had a huge, V reversal, and even then it would take quite a bit of time. But this trigger price is going to float down, float down, float down, and in theory, depending on what this price does, it's not going to get triggered in anytime soon. So, be one to keep an eye on. Quite frankly, I mean, this pattern looks kind of nasty or whatever, but stock like this has a tendency to, and that looks sort of like an earnings gap down there, little follow through, but be interesting to see what happens with that. And then of course, last but not least is Intel, which has remained on the list, still in the midst of a sell down, never triggered in. The trigger price right now on Intel is, interestingly enough, because Intel's been on the list for the longest out of all these, and interestingly enough, the whoops, still getting used to these charts. It'll take a while. Maybe I'll figure something out too, but still above that last pivot high there. I'm switching between my screens too, so that trying to do a lot here as far as driving the show with these brand new charts. I didn't even open the old charts this morning, so I'll get the hang of it as we go. But yeah, this is basically, here we go. So that's basically what we're looking at as far as and so yeah, I mean the idea obviously is that in order to trigger in, the stock has to close above the trigger price, right? And that's one of the little things that sort of it's the confirmation, basically confirmation on the change in trend. So if I turn this into a line chart, let me just do that real quick for the fun of it. Yeah, so that'll give you a better sort of idea. So when the change, when and if the change in trend comes, theoretically this is going to move down too. So you get something like over here, right? Stocks selling off, selling off, selling off. Trigger price kind of comes down along with it, and then when and if it turns back up, we get triggered in on a close over the trigger, and then an upcycle. So if you get into a really prolonged sell-off like we're seeing now, of course this was that was, well, I don't know what that was. This was the pandemic sell-off, right? Yeah, there's been a lot of significant sell-offs here, and then it rallies back up, also extremely significantly. So my guess is it's got to stay above this, like it's still above this last sort of major pivot here, and so still in consolidation mode. If it loses that level right there, that would probably cause it to drop off the list. So, but anyhow, that looking at a line chart will give you sort of an idea of what to expect as far as close over the trigger price. So there you go. There's the 9 stocks that are on the pending list, and you can kind of go through and keep an eye on them. Keep an eye on that trigger price to see when and if it moves. So it's kind of fun to mark up the charts and follow along with them. Usually, basically, once I put those lines on my charts, then when I notice the trigger price moving down or whatever, and I don't do this every single day, but I will drag it down a little bit. And the cool thing is that usually on Wednesdays when I do this show, and you guys have seen this before, what we can see the evolution of the trigger, because a lot of times, more than a week will go by before these things trigger in. And so, a lot's going to depend on what the overall market does, because the market looks like it wants to pull back here. So anyway, but we got a pretty nice little list going here. And my guess is that, if we get a little bit of more of a sell-off in the market, some of these stocks are going to be, one or more of these stocks is very likely to trigger in over the next week or so. And there may be more stocks that actually hit this list. If any of these things, for whatever reason, the bottom drops out, it may come off the list. And so, like I said before, the pending list is always fluid, and of course the trigger price that we're watching is always fluid. And so you can follow along as closely as you want, or you can just follow the triggered list. As you can see, no stocks are triggering in today, and so maybe by this time next week, some of these stocks will have triggered in. So keep your eye on them, and I will see you back here next week, same time, same place.